delighted to introduce Professor Sacoby Wilson, who just arrived here and will be presenting our first plenary talk on diversity, equity, and inclusion in science, a focus on community-engaged research and environmental justice. Dr. Sacoby Wilson is an associate professor with the Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health and the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of Maryland. Here in the College Park School of Public Health. He directs there the Center of Community Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health. He has over 20 years of experience in environmental health science, exposure science, environmental justice, environmental health disparities, community-based participatory research, water quality analysis, air pollution studies, so fields ranging widely. He has a strong interest in partnerships with community-based organizations to study and address environmental justice and health issues and translate that research into action. And so nicely tying here to our broad sense of the Social Data Science Center. And I'm looking forward to hearing your speech and to discuss measurement issues with you subsequently. So, welcome.
Thanks for the introduction. Happy to be here. I actually changed the title. I used to go to the Water Citizens Science Association, so we talk about Jedi science. I was like, no, Star Wars, all that stuff. That's a shot. So justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion science. Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk about, as I said, I do a lot of environmental justice work, and I'm also I do one of my main soapboxes, I have a lot of soapboxes actually, is the philosophy of science. And one big issue is the lack of diversity and inclusion in science. We're really going deeper in that. How we have a lot of racial capitalism in various fields, but also in science. So I just want to talk about that real quickly. And just how, if you look at the history of our country and how we commodify certain groups, right? You think about the stolen bodies of our indigenous brothers and sisters right now in the land. It's got to be equal to stolen bodies of Africans, right? We helped build this country. I am a descendant of enslaved African, right? You can't talk about this country and talk about racial capitalism. You gotta talk about science while talking about racial capitalism. The father of gynecology, he did his studies on who? Enslaved African women, right? You look at the first, I think, heart transplant in Virginia. That heart transplant was basically stolen from a black man to give to a white man. You look at a lot of issues of medical research, medical malfeasance. You go from Tuskegee up the street in Baltimore, Turn Station. You have Henrietta Lacks. Y'all know the HeLa cells. So we have to talk about what science has done to really exploit people, right? And that exploitation has been highly problematic. And so when we think about my work in public health, we talk about social terms of health, how access to housing impacts health, right? It's a determinant of health. Access to transportation. As we know, racism is also social term of health, is a driver of health issues. And you think about my work as an environmental justice researcher, just to talk about it a little bit. Environmental justice is basically a social movement, it's a child of the civil rights movement. We talk about how some communities are overburdened by environmental hazards, local and land uses, and that leads to health impacts. From a science perspective, you have these communities that have been exposed to multiple chemical stressors, multiple physical stressors, been exposed to multiple social stressors, and then you think about the chemicals, they could be exposed to chemical mixtures. And so the science is really not keeping up with the exposure profile in these communities. So I highlight Dr. King here because Dr. King, in my opinion, is the grandfather of this movement. Those of you know your history, when Dr. King was assassinated, he was actually working in Memphis with the census workers, right? And the reason why it's important, if you look at the picture in the top right corner, you look at men with around science and say, I am a man, recognize my humanity. You can apply that to science, right? Recognize the humanity of people that, when we use the term subjects, I'm gonna get into that. Recognize the humanity of people that we're supposed to study. We have to change that dynamic. And so this EJ movement is really a very important movement you think about right now with the current issues on climate change, the current focus of the administration on just energy transition, the Inflation Reduction Act that's passed. This is a huge issue, but there's a lot of scientific gaps in what it means to be a community that's dealing with a lot of these hazards, dealing with a lot of these exposures, dealing with the impacts. And then you think about environmental justice real quickly, you don't know what it is a definition. First definition, EPA's definition, I call it the Kumbaya definition. Fair treatment involving all people, regardless of race, class, etc., when it comes to development enforcement regulations. We wouldn't have environmental injustice or environmental issues if we actually enforce all the laws and regulations equally, right? And so you look at the book called The Law That Speaks to That a little bit. The second definition is a definition I think is more holistic. Environmental justice is served when people can realize the full potential and experience the isms, right? Fill in the blank, having access to decent housing, having access to quality food recreation, having access to good paying jobs, having access to democratic decision making. Environmental justice is a holistic framework. It's about what we live, what we work, what we play, what we pray, what we learn. That's it, what we live, what we work, what we play, what we pray, what we learn. It's not an environment that's over there. It's local, it's proximal, it's pocketbook. And so one of the first studies on environmental justice was Toxic Waste and Race 1987. And this picture you see on the right, the father of the environmental justice movement, his name is Dr. Robert Bullard. He wrote this book called Dumped in Dixie. And you see people on the right-hand side, they laid across the ground with stop PCB-laden trucks that had contaminated dirt with polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. And the 40th anniversary of this fight in Warren County against this PCB landfill is happening now. So that was the spark for the environmental justice movement in Warren County, North Carolina. Just want to highlight that real quick. So if you think about environmental justice, the way I frame it is a three-legged stool. You have the traditional frame of a differential burden of hazards, incinerators, chemical plants. Some of you may go to Baltimore, you know what a Bluebird incinerator. Some of you may go to Ocean City and say, hey mom, what's that smell? Chicken farms, right? Some of you may go to live in Brandywine, coal-fired power plants. Some of you may go to DC and go to Ward 7 and 8 and see all the traffic. Some of you may drive to DC a lot. You're spewing combustion byproducts, right, that impact human health. That's an environmental issue. So highways and byways, goods, foods, ports, incinerators, chemical plants. The second part of that, those communities that are overburdened have a tendency to also have high concentrations of social stressors. And those same communities do not have access to what we call health promoting infrastructure. So you may have heard the term food deserts, food swamps. Recreational deserts, medical deserts, right? They may also not have access to nature. If you think about the issue of climate change and climate change mitigation, a lot of people don't have access to trees. Study came out a few years ago that said that African Americans, blacks have 3 times less access to nature compared to white counterparts. Poor folks have 3 times less access to nature compared to their wealthy counterparts. So that's a science question. What are the implications of that when it comes to climate change and scenarios, right? How are we going to really do really good mitigation if folks don't have equal access to nature, green infrastructure, right, as part of this mitigation strategy? And how are we going to really make sure we have equity and preparedness and equity and climate resilience if we don't have the types of infrastructure, whether it be building infrastructure or downtown infrastructure for people to help with climate change issues? So when you think about the EJ science, as I said before, a lot of communities are dealing with a lot of chemicals. So there could be exposure disparities when it comes to exposure to lead. You know, lead is a neurotoxicant. Think about the issue right now that's happening in Jackson, Mississippi. I think everybody knows about Jackson, right? Right? I see that shit. So they're not just dealing with the issue of water treatment plant that's broken down. They're dealing with E. coli issues. They also have a lead issue, very similar to what's happening that happened in Flint, Michigan. Okay, and you know recently Baltimore has had a huge issue with sewage backups and water issues as well. So you see a pattern of this happening. You have a lot of folks of color, you have a lot of people who are in poverty, who have lack of access to infrastructure, and you know a lot of our cities, our infrastructure is eroding, falling apart. So, but you have that issue, and then also these exposure disparities lead to health disparities. So burden disparities lead to exposure disparities, lead to risk disparities, lead to health disparities. And race is the single most important predictor of the distribution of environmental hazards, not income, race. So studies have shown that. And so what we need to do as it relates to advancing the science is really understand the interplay of these various factors. So you've heard the term pandemic. I like to use the term syndemic. You have populations that deal with multiple pandemics. The pandemic of racism, pandemic of climate change, okay, the pandemic of environmental justice, the pandemic of economic apartheid. Think about the communities that I'm talking about, that I work with, who have been impacted every day by exposures, by hazards, by not having access to infrastructure. That's a huge issue. Where's science in really understanding those issues? And then where's science in actually translating that research to action? So, I want to dig into this a little bit more in Baltimore. So, some of you may know about the framing the book of Baltimore about Black Blood Clot. So the issue is you have a lot of segregated Black neighborhoods in Baltimore, in the Windsor Blood East and West Baltimore. And then in the center of Baltimore, you have a larger concentration of white populations. And what you see is, in Baltimore, there's a relationship between that segregation of redlining and health outcomes. So areas where have higher, you see more redline neighborhoods, you're going to see poor health outcomes. Hopefully you can see that the correlation or the spatial relationship between redlining and life expectancy, for example. This next map, you see a similar patterning when you look at redline neighborhoods compared to asthma hospitalization rates. So areas that are redline have had what divestment, disinvestment, they don't have good infrastructure. Those areas are segregated. And because of segregation leads to higher concentration of economic risk, social risk, and also environmental risk. And also, for those of you who do climate change work, Baltimore is also a heat island. So think about the concrete asphalt, the albedo effect, right? It stays warmer longer, Baltimore and other cities. And so there's studies that show that some of the neighborhoods that in Baltimore that have a lot of concrete asphalt, you will see a lot of impervious surfaces, and you see higher heat temperature levels, where you see more impervious surfaces. Going back to my point earlier about the lack of nature in these neighborhoods. And so there's been studies that have shown that across Baltimore, you can see 15 to 20 degree differences in temperature. But this photo at the top, if you can see it well, this is a study that was done in concert with community members from students in our School of Journalism here, where they put out temperature sensors, and they found not just in different neighborhoods, on the same block, on the same side of the street, houses near each other, the power of one tree. You can see 15 to 20 degree difference in temperature, just having a tree, right? So in areas in Baltimore that are impacted by heat issues, heat-related morbidity and mortality, they have a lot of concrete and asphalt, they don't have trees, and they also don't have air conditioning, right? So what can we do? So I think part of this is that I started with the jet out with the justice. We have to have the justice focus when we're doing science. We have to focus on restorative justice. That's very important. I think we need to make sure that when we're doing science, we are really building communities and doing research that actually has impact. It's not colonial, that's not extractive, that's not helicopter research. So I like to say that I do empowerment science, and I did is, building capacity in communities, building that critical literacy, building that agency, and using science to build community power. It's a very different paradigm that we do in the justice field. We're trying to make sure that science is not extractive. It's not about what's wrong with folks and what's right with people. It's not about inaction but acting right. And also taking a more salutogenic approach. Those of you know Antonovsky's salutogenesis, promoting health and well-being across all of this environment, political, built, natural environment, social, economic, and also spiritual environment. So we want to take a salutogenic frame to doing science. And so it's also about shifting power and how we do research. There's been a lot of work done that's talked about the lack of diversity, equity, inclusion when it comes to who's doing the research. We have very few when it comes to professors of color across this country who are doing the research who are actually tenured. You have very few students who come from underrepresented groups who are in the pipeline. That's an issue. When it comes to inclusion in science, we also have to make sure that the people who are most impacted are doing science. right? They have to be doing the science. You know there was erosion in the trust of science in a previous administration. That erosion of trust predates that administration, right? And part of this, we're not increasing the number of people who are actually scientists. You don't have to have I'm gonna say this, a whisper to you. Y'all know you don't have to have a PhD to be a scientist. Okay? The credentialing and the rankism, that's part of the problem as well. For example, you cannot be a PI with NIH if you don't have a PhD. You have people who are doing science. It's about science of the method. It's about rigor, reproducibility, right? It's about having a quality assurance performance plan, a QAP, so you use QAPs. It's about data transparency, okay? Scalability, y'all know all this stuff. That's scientific method. That has nothing to do with a PhD. Okay, so that in itself is a barrier for folks that actually do science. And then also the whole other issue, soapbox, is the indirect, the IDC, the indirect cost rates. That provides, we get a lot of money to the university, right? They cut it off the top of the budget. What about the community partners? They don't have cost agreements with federal agencies. That's a side issue, right? So you have those things there. And another thing that I want to just kind of focus on that we do, it'll come up. And so when we think about, environmental justice and why it's important for science, that we have these 17 principles of environmental justice, and principles 5 and 7 talk about how communities, the community voice needs to be, really heard. And so communities should be engaged in all stages of decision making. I'll bring it back to the science frame. But we want to make sure that those who are most impacted are engaged in decision making. So I'll skip this slide. And then when it comes to, I do a lot of work, doing air quality monitoring. I'll get to that, I'm not sure. Make sure the time keep going, I go over. I have like 30 more slides, so I'm not even close to being maybe 40. Please do slides. That's also for those of you who are young investigators, do not do what I'm doing. Use me as a role model. Do not use me as slides. Okay. Someone's at a bad habit. Also too much text. I should have had like 3 bullets in the slide, but I'll correct it later. But one of the things that I like to focus on, in a lot of work, and I talked about the Inflation Reduction Act. Some of you may be familiar with President Biden's Executive Order 14008. As we move from very economic to clean economy, we want to make sure 40% of those benefits go to disadvantaged communities, right? And so there's a lot of policy out there right now to address environmental justice. But part of environmental injustice is the fact that a lot of these communities, when you have these mobile and stationary sources of pollution, they have exposure differentials, right? So we have to have exposure justice. We have to address exposure, and we have to reduce the emissions from sources, whether it be mobile sources like tourist vehicles, heavy and medium light trucks, public transit vehicles, our goods moving vehicles, right? Whether it be from our commuter vehicles in general, or our large EPA permitted clean air act facilities, minor sources, etc. And so we have to make sure that we're looking at exposure from magnitude and frequency, right? And really doing studies, again, that capture exposure better. In many cases in our epidemiologic studies, our exposure data is really poor. For example, if you're doing a study to look at exposure to air pollution and looking at health effects, right? It could be a cross-sectional study, a longitudinal study. In many cases, the air pollution data is leveraged from local monitors, right? Unfortunately, the EPA regular monitoring network is very sparse, and those monitors are not located in the hotspots of pollution. They're located in the background to give you a representative exposure for that region. But what's happening at the regional level is not what's happening in my neighborhood. So actually, we call that exposure misclassification. In many ways, that's bad science, to be honest. And so I'll talk a little bit about what we do to address that gap. But that's one of the gaps in ethics studies and using that kind of data. And so we need to really make sure we have monitoring and measurement tools that allow us to get the best data so we get the best policy. So around my center, we talked about a little bit in the introduction. But what I want to get to a little bit now is we're going to have inclusive science and have diversity in science and have justice in science. It's really important to engage the communities that are most impacted. So this is the communication continuum. As you move from left to right, communication, trust, action, participation increases. So some of you may be doing outreach with communities. Some of you may be doing consultation, involvement. For me, the two things I do the most are participatory research and community-driven research. And so it's important for us to do science, and involve our science, to make sure those who are most impacted, whether we're dealing with chemical spills, whether they're dealing with the impacts of a hurricane. You just saw that Fiona hit Puerto Rico basically 5 years after Maria hit Puerto Rico. You know, last year Ida hit New Orleans on the same day Katrina. You know, this was the 60th anniversary of Katrina, right? And so whether it be hurricanes, whether it be heat issues, you know, whether it be social issues, we need to engage those. When we think about gun violence research, we have faculty on this campus who are doing some work with folks who are experiencing gun violence. We got to engage the folks who are experiencing issues because they're the potential experts, right? And so when you think about working with communities, you have to build partnerships. And you know, this community science is really community science. Is what I'm talking about. I'm going to talk about citizen science a little bit too. But you know, in order to address this kind of extractive colonial science regime that we have to do community-based research, disparate action research, and community-owned management research, which I'll talk about. So we want to rely on community and cultural knowledge systems, like rely on indigenous knowledge systems. Rely on those communities that have the fence line. Fence line means you may have a factory, right? You have community literally at the boundary of that factory who are being impacted by the emissions from that factory. So that's the term fence line. And then you want to be able to look at the cumulative impacts of those facilities, the cumulative exposure assessment, cumulative risk assessment. Again, in many ways, the cumulative exposure, cumulative risk, and cumulative impact assessment is not capturing the everyday experiences or the life course experiences that folks have who live in these communities. So that's a science gap. So when we think about CBPR, and I mentioned the Center for Environmental Justice before about community voices being all about decision making, in the same way in research, the community should be engaged in all stages of the research process. Develop the questions, okay? Figure out what the methodology is. Help with data collection. Maybe do a data analysis depending on the type of project, right? Dissemination and translation to action, okay? So core principles, community unit identity, build up community strengths, promote collaboration and equity. We balance research and action. Again, many of us are taught to just do research, right, and just study a problem. For a lot of things that I work with and work in, that doesn't work out. That's extractive. That is not inclusive science, and that's not really getting at the equity issue either. When it comes to make sure that the science actually has impact. So you want to have quality processes. So again, good partnerships are built on good relationships. So you need trust, you need some Aretha Franklin, you gotta get respect, right? You gotta have good communication, and the same ingredients that you need to have when you have relationships with your friends, your family, your colleagues. You know the ingredients that lead to good relationships. You don't want to have the ingredients that lead to bad relationships, right? So do the opposite of the bad relationships. But you have to have relationships, and you want to have meaningful outcomes. It's just not good enough to just do a study, okay? Oh, we found that target impacts health. And you know, the point is to grandma, grandpa. Like grandson, I could have told you that. So what? What are you doing about it? Okay? Where's the action? So, did you improve air quality? Did you improve water quality? Did you eliminate disparities? And then transformation. That is the transformation of the researcher and the community members. That is the political transformation. That is going to be transformation of the community. That is going to be transformation of science and knowledge. So we focus a lot on transforming science and knowledge, but are we advancing the concerns? Are we addressing the concerns of those communities? And so I always like to kind of go back to Boyer's 5 minutes of science. To me, if you're not doing this is me, y'all. It's my opinion, soapbox. You're not doing all 5 dimensions, you're doing incomplete science. So we incentive, the previous speaker talked about incentives, we over-incentivize, overvalue the science of inquiry, scholarship inquiry. We undervalue the scholarship integration, being multidisciplinary. We undervalue the scholarship teaching. We We highly unbound academia, the scholarship of engagement, and the scholarship of application. So in the work that I do, we have to be able, scientists have to be able to do all 5 dimensions. Not just the one that's over-incentivized. Oh, you know, Sacoby is published pairs, I'm getting this H index, high impact factor journal, I'm not going to get tenure. You know what? Community members don't care about your peer-reviewed publications, folks. Policymakers don't either. Part of the problem is, I'm going to use the words YOLO. Peer-reviewed publications does not science communication make. Have y'all heard Yoda say that before? No, he hasn't said it before. But you get my point. We over-incentivize peer-reviewed publications. We've under-incentivized doing white papers and briefs, doing maps, doing newsletters, doing community reports, using social media, doing old media, new media. We got to get the information the way that people can receive it. And we have to make sure the right stakeholders receive the information in the right form. Policymakers are not going to read our peer-reviewed publications. That is really about us. Peer-reviewed publications is about us. And you say, well, Dr. Wilson, what are you talking about? You don't know. I'm an editor-in-chief of the journal. I'm editor-in-chief of the Journal of Environmental Justice. I understand it completely. But again, we have to make sure that our work is getting to the folks who make decisions about the issues. And the best way to get the policymakers is not going to be through a peer-reviewed publication. It's going to be through a policy brief. It's going to be through a fact sheet. It can be through a conversation. Right? I work with a lot of bills. I don't share my peer-reviewed publications with legislators. It's white papers, fact sheets, briefs. I'll talk to their staffer. I give them a couple paragraphs. They send me a bill, I review it to make sure it makes sense. There's no peer-reviewed publication that gets shared with them in that process. So this is important stuff. 5 dimensions of science. And one thing in public health that we have concern about is health equity tourism. You have folks who don't have any experience in health equity research who parachute in. Oh, we have a problem, or even like a post-disaster. Let's see what's happening. What have you done to actually build the community back up when you do that work? That's a research ethics issue, right? How are you actually, doing perspective work, not reactionary work? And how are you making sure that your work is committed to justice, right? And so we got to stop academic tourism. When you see an issue, we just kind of go and extract it and leave. I call that pimping people's pain. Communities don't need folks who do that. They need scientists who are really about solutions and action, okay? So I just want to make that point. Oh, slide it off a little bit. So when you're engaging communities, if you want to get to this work, oh, Dr. Wilson, I don't know how to do this. What do we need to do? I call it the 2 hands of engagement. What are the issues? What are the impacts? What are the opportunities? What are the benefits and hardships? You got to be transparent about your why and understand the community's why. You may want to say, hey, I want to look at a new, some type of genetic sort of mutation in this a certain population. They might be, well, we're not really interested in that mutation, but we're interested in exposure to a pollutant that could be impacting health. So kind of come to some consensus so you can get out of it, you can get out of it, and they can get out of it together. So that's part of the relationship. So what are the benefits to both parties? It has to be reciprocal, right? And how can you outline a partnership that leads to effective outcomes, okay? And then for me, when we talk about science, whether it be big issues like climate change, let's not focus so much on the S, the big S. Let's talk more about the little S. We are all doing science every day. I'm using science right now. We wear science, we eat science, we watch science, we breathe science, we drive science, right? We have folks who are applied scientists. We're naturally doing, everybody's doing science. But how can we make sure we connect into the science we're doing? So you got to make, again, the science that as you frame it, focus on issues that are important to folks. So food, faith, family, health, and jobs. How can we connect the science that you do to food, faith, family, health, and justice? Other things that we add to the list, but you don't have 5 things. So I think it's important to things that are really important to everyday folks. And that's the way to make connections with communities if you want to really do work that has an impact or more impact. So I talked about citizen science. I just want to highlight real quickly. Citizen science, as y'all may know, is democratization of science. Yeah, a lot of people like doing bird watching and water quality monitoring. That's old school citizen science. I think, the Citizen Science Association is doing a lot of work to bring diversity and inclusion in JEDI. into that field and diversify, but make sure that it's not volunteers or just volunteering, make sure people are being paid for their time. So there's a lot of training and evolution happening in the system science field in the U.S. And so a couple of examples, and how am I doing time? That's 15. Oh, wow, that give me a lot of time. So I'm gonna take a hit. And hopefully not boring y'all. I have to get y'all to stand up and do some arms movements so the end of it's a little bit low here. I'll throw in a couple more jokes in here and there. It's not even joke stuff. You can't really joke about this stuff, but I'll try to do bad jokes, okay? So when I was in Nebraska in the UMC Chapel Hill, go Tar, sorry, I worked with the Western Revitalization Association. So this is a post, so the neighborhoods, and this is Medina from West Chapel Hill, these are post-slavery freedmen's black neighborhoods that are primarily poor, elderly neighborhoods, right? And one of the issues in my work that maybe relevant to some of y'all, I do a lot of work in communities that are unincorporated. So that I'm a town mayor, that I'm a town council, so I call it contamination without representation, okay? So y'all can use that one, you want to use that one. So you look at Brandywine, Maryland, for example, in our county, unincorporated. If you look at Lothian, some of y'all may know about some of the water coalitions in Lothian, also unincorporated. Now we also have some parts of the College Park area unincorporated. And you may see some issues there, but usually you see a lot of unincorporated communities in rural areas. And so you see that the communities don't have access to publicly regulated sewer and water infrastructure. Again, Baltimore, Flint, Jackson, right? But it's a different type of issue. And also they end up being the sites where we dump our land, when we dump our lagoons, so we'll dump the landfill in the unincorporated area. We'll dump a coal power plant in the unincorporated area. We tend to put those types of environmental hazards in those areas because they don't have any political power, right? They have no voice. So, doing work with the grad student, they were going to build this highway through the community, and you see a lot of, you may see recently Secretary Buttigieg gave a grant to parts of the city of Detroit to address a highway that basically destroyed that community, right? It's almost like it's almost $1 billion, right, y'all? It's $1 billion recently. I'm not sure billion, but close to $1 billion. And so you see this happen a lot where communities of color get these highways built up. If you look at historically, that was through the National Highway Defense Act. Many highways and byways were built through black and brown communities to connect suburban neighborhoods to the jobs in the city and core, right? Now, you can look at DC as an example of that, Charlotte, North Carolina, Durham, North Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia. You look at LA, you see the impacts of that kind of fragmentation and bifurcation of communities, right? The destruction of the social, cultural fabric and the environmental fabric of those communities. And so this is going to happen in this community in Medina. At the same time, they're in the ETJ of Medina. So the ETJ is the extraterritorial jurisdiction. It's different than being unincorporated, but it's the same thing like the fiefdom. Like you have the council and vote, and then you are growing food for we're taxing you outside the area, outside the council and vote, but you have no power. It's that same kind of concept where they have no power over zoning and planning. So the houses will be built, they were not connected to sewer and water infrastructure, sewer and water lines, but at the same time, even though they had sewer and water lines that ran through their neighborhood, they weren't connected. At the same time, the West End neighborhood, which is part of where hosted the sewer treatment plant. So I'm going to repeat that. They were not connected to sewer and water lines, but they hosted the sewer treatment plant. Y'all get that? Think about the older workers' compound that they exposed to. The fact that they have sewer and water infrastructure, right? So these are what we call the lack of basic amenities, major EJ issues. And so the community group, in response to some researchers wanted to take their data from this scene, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, they came with their own research model called community owner-managed research. So you can think back to the slide where I showed the continuum, outreach, consultation, involvement, historic community driven. This will be a form of community research. So we call it's really about science for compliance. Again, remember before we mentioned science is focused on action. It's about science for compliance. And the funny story, after about 10 papers published with this community group, she said, you can't publish with community. Yes, you can. Only have 2 papers for my dissertation. This is not even my dissertation, actually. My dissertation is on industrial hog farms. So anybody knows about chicken farms, do a lot of work chicken farms. This is a side point, but my point is, you can do good work and also publish when you're working with communities. So I just want to say, when you think about this whole paradigm of community-based research and practice, you can do good work and also get published. So I don't want to not say that. And so again, with this framework, the data is used for solutions and empowerment and change. And so we also talk about this framework called legal epidemiology. So just quickly, the idea is, in exposed disease paradigm, we have the source of emissions, we have a contaminant or agent, we have a concentration, we have an exposure, we have biology effective dose, right, and we have the health effect, okay? In a lot of cases in our epi studies, we focus on the right side of the equation, the causality a lot, right? So the Hill's criteria, I think is what they're called. And I think part of the issue is, if the science is not really understanding the various chemical mixtures folks are exposed to, we're going to make the point that the industrial footprint and the monitoring footprint and our science is not keeping up with the industrial footprint and the exposure scenarios that folks are doing every day to live in these communities. So the idea is, let's focus more on exposure and seeing if the data we collect, we can find a legal angle to get change. So this gets back to the issue of science for compliance. So you do the research and then try to see, are they compliant with the Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, building codes, Title VI Civil Rights Act. And so we did work that with the community, trained these, citizen scientists. They collected their own water samples. We did a septic survey and found poverty and septic failure in the well water, high levels of fecal coliforms and other indicators of fecal material, and they were able to leverage this work to delay the bypass from being built. Eventually, they did get built. They were able to move it a little bit so they destroyed some of the black churches and black neighborhoods, but it did get built. But they're still fighting actually today. And we were also able to do this work to give people first-time installation of sewer water infrastructure. So these are what we call pre-New Deal communities. The New Deal should have fixed all this stuff. Now I know the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure bill is like the second coming of the New Deal, but the New Deal should have fixed. So we have a lot of folks in this country who do not have access to safe sewer and water, y'all. Again, you're learning that. You're learning from Flint, you're learning from what's happening in Baltimore again, and you see what's happening in Jackson. So it's hard to see this slide, but I just want to say real quickly, one of my mentors is Dr. Bullard again. He has a consortium of HBCUs where they're using a community university model, and so they're engaging with historical black colleges in the Gulf Coast to engage with communities that are impacted by climate change and EJ issues. I just want to show a quick comment as a model where how we can work better with communities. Active institutions can work better with communities, and this is one model of that. And so another community I work in is Uniontown. So Uniontown is still Selma. I know the history of the U.S. is Selma, Alabama. It's also unincorporated. So Uniontown it's an interesting community. So that top picture on the left, it is not a mountain. That is 8 million tons of coal ash. Okay? So that mountain of coal ash was built on top of an old plantation cemetery. So you see the great number. So one care about your living, and one care about your dead. The picture on the top right, those are spray fields. And so when you flush your toilet, your waste goes to a sewage treatment plant. When they flush their toilet, that waste goes to a containment pond, and they spray the waste. So that pond you see at the bottom is not a natural pond. That's a human waste pond. Okay? So this is happening. This is now Alabama, y'all. So again, remember I said people don't have sewer and water infrastructure? You may have heard about Lowndes County, Alabama. Maybe the news Catherine Flower. Actually, Catherine spoke here 6 to 8 months ago. She spoke here about her work, right? So you have this, so we work with the community on this issue, and so I just want to highlight that work. Also does work in Curtis Bay, just to get some hands. How many are familiar with Curtis Bay or South Baltimore? Anybody raise hands? Few people. So Curtis Bay is a very industrial area. It has a lot of port activities, goods movement. It has these major polluters that are emitting toxins, and they're permitted to do so. coal-fired power plants, etc. So you have cumulative impacts of these facilities. You also, when you think about communities that have these environmental justice issues, they're usually low income, low wealth, right? Because I said before. And so look at this Curtis Bay Bayfront area. Look at the median household income compared to the area. That's a huge difference, y'all. Okay? So that's structural poverty there. At the same time, these communities that we're not talking about birth disparities, with the exposure disparities, with the risk disparities, with the health disparities. Look at the disparities in mortality in the Bayfront area for heart disease, lung cancer, and respiratory disease compared to other parts of the state. Right. So you see major issues. And so at one point in time, on the toxic inventory, this zip code was the most toxic zip code in the country. Okay. And I just want to highlight that we did some citizen science work with Bedford High School. So they were going to put this new incinerator called the Energy Answers Incinerator in this community, about a mile away from Bedford High School. And Destiny Walker was one of the students who organized and did community science. And they were able to stop the center from being built. And she in 2016 won the Golden Prize for North America, which is basically a Nobel Peace Prize for environmental activism. So again, science for action, right? I do a lot of work on air quality, said before, just real quickly. One of the major pollutants that are associated with combustion of fossil fuels, right? Diesel, gasoline, natural gas, in particular matter. And PM can cause various health effects, asthma attack, heart disease, stroke, electric blood pressure, Alzheimer's, diabetes, infertility, birth defects, stillbirth like babies, cancer, lead to decrease, lead to premature mortality, and also decreased life expectancy, right? So that's just a combustion byproduct. Black carbon is a major combustion byproduct from our buses, and our construction vehicles, and our big trucks, right? And so we're doing work in Chevrolet. What we're doing, how we look at air quality monitoring, we might talk about the air quality monitoring before the EPA monitor was sparsely located, right? So we're doing, we're using low-cost sensors that get more monitoring areas where you have a lot of air pollution from mobile or stationary sources. But in this case, really focusing more on traffic in like warehouse districts, right? And so we're doing this kind of work in Savannah, Georgia. We're doing this work in Charleston, South Carolina. We also have a monitoring network in Newark, New Jersey, right? It goes by Newark and all the pollution sources in Newark, right? Working with this kindergarten and sophomore neighborhood. This is some of the data that we collected. We use the purple sensor. It's a low-cost sensor. It's cloud-based. They go to the cloud. That can collect PM10, PM2.5, and PM1. PM10 is the big stuff. PM2.5 and PM1 is the small things that get into the social system. Impact alveoli and do a lot of damage across your organ systems, right? So this is a little bit there, I gotta speed it up. So we have this stationary monitoring that we're doing. We partnered with the town, Chevrolet, with the town mayor and the green team. We've also partnered with NBE to use our data for action. So for inspections, for anti-island campaigns, they've had state police to go out to Chevrolet to give tickets to folks, the big trucks who are idling, because you know that stop and start is where a lot of pollution is created, right? The black carbon emissions. So we do have a sort of community emergency government partnership. I call it the CUG. Doesn't sound good, but we have a CUG, and the CUG I think has been effective. And we're also expanding this purport network to monitor air pollution at our local. And the last slide, I forgot to say in the last slide, we're going to start doing some personal monitoring too. So have stationary monitoring and also personal monitoring. And we want to also, we're going to have a network of purple areas at our local high schools in Prince County. I'll say that quickly. And one of my partners is Acklin. So this is a commercial, y'all, I'm sorry. Acklin is the world's leader in mobile-based monitoring. Things like EVs to do monitoring greenhouse gas emissions, methane. They've done a lot of work on methane leaks in California and also Gulf Coast around petrochemical infrastructure. And I just wanted to highlight them because they're going to be coming in to do mobile monitoring where we're doing stationary monitoring. And they've shown that mobile monitoring, blockable monitoring, were very granular hyperlocal monitoring, 500 times difference of PM loads compared to EPA regulatory monitors. So when I say the bad data in, bad policy out, the EPA monitors are really not capturing, again, the exposures people are experiencing. So this block level data is really groundbreaking. And so this is to show you some of the work they've done in California. I think the map didn't move. I think it's static, but they also look at CO2 levels. So that's just not the mapping the cold plumes like particular matter, involving in compounds and nitrogen dioxide, etc. They're also mapping greenhouse gases like CO2 and methane. So I just want to show that. And then they done some work. They have a new partnership now with the Department of Energy and Environment in DC. So you can kind of see, they're driving on the streets and look at the concentration of particulate matter in micrograms per cube. So they do this, they basically drive across multiple road segments over again. So you have the combination of stationary monitoring and mobile monitoring. Another one of my colleagues I work with, Dr. Susan Annenberg, she uses satellite-based monitoring. So this is some of the innovations in the technology that allow us to do better science, right? And air pollution is a huge deal when it comes to communities I work in. And then just to kind of close, I know I'm probably getting close to overtime or near time. 2 minutes, okay, cool, thank you. And in my last 20 slides, I will cover in 2 minutes. So a big thing that we do, going back to that slide that I didn't cover well, but empowerment science. Using science to empower people, getting scientific tools in the hands of people. The whole idea behind empowerment science is how can we build people's capacity, particularly those who are most impacted, who are really contextual experts, right? They're living with those issues every day. As a scientist, I joke, I live in Bowie. I don't have any EJ issues. I don't live in air pollution. I don't live in a food desert. I have like 8 grocery stores on the mountain of my house. Right? So I'm not experiencing those everyday negative impacts, right? Those social stresses that folks are experiencing in communities with environmental, energy, and climate justice issues. So what we try to do is develop tools and apps that they can do their own science, and that's empowerment science. And so we had this one project that's funded by ARP. It didn't really go well because the idea was we're going to develop this app and then have these pop-up trainings like youth going to engage the elderly. Elderly is probably not a good word. Our sagacious population, that's a better phrase. And then help them understand how to use apps for collecting environmental data. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit and that whole thing got changed. But we had this tool called Monoblock Counts. It's a tool that we're developing that allows us to collect block level data on environmental solutions. You heard me use the term solutions before. Ecological solutions, social, built solutions. And you can get count the number of stores, active amount, industry, physical disorder, housing, services, etc. And this can be like a 411, so folks can say what's happening in their neighborhood, and then used as a decision support tool when it comes to investments, changing zoning and planning, doing comprehensive plans, where you want to build a new school, where you want to build a new housing complex, where we should be shutting down grandfather facilities that may be pollution intensive, right? Where we should build, a new green wing, for example, where we should be trying to build climate resilient infrastructure. It can be used as a decision support tool to support those activities. One of the big things that we do working with the CGIS team here on campus is develop geospatial tools to map environmental justice. So there's a lot of tools out there that have been built to map environmental justice. One of the oldest state level tools is the Cal Environmental Screen. The oldest federal level tool is US EPA EJ Screen. One of the newest federal level tools is CDC's EJ Index. The little bit older but new tool is the Council of Environmental Quality's Climate and Environmental Justice Screen tool, CDC's tool. And that tool, I mentioned executive order 14008 earlier. That tool is part of that executive order. So as we try to give benefits to communities that are disadvantaged, it allows us to map and prioritize communities that have the most need. So you see these tools been developed, but these tools are only as good as the data that we have, right? And so here's just some of the domains that we use in our tool. And if you want to see the tool, you can go to www.ceejh.center. And again, that tool is built in partnership with the CGIS team on campus. We also have a park equity mapping tool that we built with DNR, Department of Natural Resources, to map green space and look at park equity. So again, think about climate change, mitigation, adaptation, resilience. And just here's some of the domains that are in that tool, and you can see like the weights that we use for the tool. And then we're in the process of building a climate and health equity mapper. So again, I think building these tools is a very, very important part of doing science, and having inclusive science in addressing, the justice issues or the injustices that communities are experiencing. So when you think about the environmental justice framework, again, it's about what we live, we work, we play, we currently learn, right? And you think about the different forms of justice we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to representative justice. So we want to make sure the community's voices are heard in the work that we do, in the science that we do, right? We want to make sure we have procedural justice as well, distributive justice. The to make sure that folks are receiving equity and justice. Or when you think about from a science perspective, we have to make sure the science that we're doing is really has an equity focus. Again, not just focus on the problems, but also focus on solutions, right? And so we got some funding from the EPA to expand these tools. Now, I forgot to mention some of that hyperlocal air quality work that we're doing in Chevrolet and also Newark, et cetera. We've gotten dollars from the Nation's Earth Fund to expand our monitoring across the Atlantic. So we're engaging social infrastructure in Black communities like churches, fraternities, sororities, the NAACP. And we also got a gift from Meta to help us also build our infrastructure. So we have some education program that we're doing in STEM. So to get more folks into environmental justice science, environmental justice activism, and environmental justice advocacy. And I will just leave you with this quote. You can read it. Thank you for your time.
All right.
I had a Meta dinner in New York yesterday, and I had a train misadventure this morning to get here. That's why I was late. But y'all didn't know I was until I told y'all I was late. But train misadventure, so lots of fun.
It worked out beautifully, and I thought you for a second there you weren't joking on the last 25, but it was impressive.
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. So we have time for questions, and I do wonder while you guys are deciding to raise your hand, pose one to you in light of what we heard earlier from Sunshine. And what many of us are sort of in the name of doing with these platforms where you collect community or sensor data, but driven through the community. Do you have a process in place to sort of look at coverage? Do you have everybody, or are you worried about sort of inequity not being visible because certain communities tend to fail to be visible?
Oh yeah, no, that's a really good question. There was two studies that recently got published. Think of it in the citizen science sphere. So a lot of citizen science research is volunteer based, right? So you look, we just published a study, I forget which journal, I apologize, but just got published. They talk about inequities in the distribution of rain gauge research. And we don't see populations of color or low income populations fully covered. There's another study that showed that water quality monitoring that's been done by volunteers. There's a lack of diversity in who's doing the water quality monitoring, and so the rivers and streams that they're focused on are not the rivers and streams that maybe most impaired. And so then the policy that comes out of the state agency is not really informed by the areas that have the maximum need, right? So there's a lot of studies that in that vein. Now, in my work, because we're doing the community-based research framework, the community identity. So part of the issue is can you replicate this or scale this into other communities? So that is one of the challenges of using CPR framework. It's very localized research, but again, it managed to show a lot of the national data. A lot of the communities I work in, they have the same issues. So if you change the racial profile or the geographic profile, the exposure burden, the hazard burden, the income issues, they tend to be the same, right? So you can in some ways, replicate the approach and scale it. Any other questions? You sure? I'm not rushing back from New York to get here. I'm very good at this. That is. Okay, go ahead. Oh, it's a great question. Great. Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for very inspiring. Well, as you were talking, we're thinking more internationally. So when you define community, even within the U.S., the diversity we have, the languages, the educational level, the poverty, the background. So one of the things is really, again, that kind of coverage and how can you build these tools or make them adaptable to the diversity that comes with the community, as you said, different racial backgrounds and languages, and susceptible to sensitive data. Are they willing to share this information? It comes also their legal presence versus not. So it hits another wall of representation because we don't know these apps to account for the problems we know. In cases survey research with smaller communities who are not as capable, trying to use their voice. How can we build this or indicate from the beginning as opposed to being legal about that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, the international piece is really important. One of my partners, I'll try to be quick, is Namate. They're a global EJ group. They just a lot of groups that work like legal empowerment for folks around the world who just dealing with land tenureship issues. So, land tenureship is a huge issue around the world. So they've actually now a North American branch. So we've actually built a Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition to engage those frontline folks and communities and individual groups in the science. So that's one of the ways to try to get, but it's also hard to get some of these groups because they don't have a lot of capacity. You heard me talk about capacity. So capacity, they don't have the capacity to be engaged, right? And also I work with a group, and I'll try to be succinct. I'm never really succinct with my responses, but I also work with a group to speak about the language issue. Central Day Employee Familiar, by Karen Poole, the executive director. She does a lot of work with Latino families in the DC area. And so we're doing work with them to really help engage Latino, Latinx population on farm issues. And then also we're doing some work with agricultural workers who are dealing with some issues on COVID and other types of COVID too, through some of those groups. And those groups are indeed Spanish-speaking population. So we do have advocacy partners who help us with work, and with tools development, we try to build participant feedback loops. So the EJ Screen tool was not built from scratch. It was built, we had a series of meetings with folks, particularly in Bladensburg, to help us make sure we had the right indicators. So we had like a pool of indicators, and which ones make sense for the state of Maryland, to make sure it's contextualized, which ones are missing, can we find the data, and we added that data. But yes, language issues, contexts are different, and communities have been racialized, minoritized, and invisibilized. They're sometimes they're very hard to reach, but I think that advocacy infrastructure, those connected groups, those are the ones that we work a lot to. So thank you for the question.
Thank you for the talk. So I have a question about how do you see the future of participant research, evangelizing outside of the environmental justice framework? Because as researchers, we felt a lot of our work is about understanding, and it's not a problem we aim to turn into action. Our hope is that someone who's better at implementing this is gonna act on it. So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I just had a thank you for that question. You made me feel a little bit. So I just had a meeting with one of the members of the team that's working on updating our CV on campus. And I'm sure y'all been very pleased that we finally have in the CV a section on community engagement. I've been here since 2011. I just officially been a full professor since August 1st. So that means half of what I've done since I've been in Maryland hasn't counted, y'all. Y'all laugh. That wasn't a good experience. It's y'all know. It's funny now, but wasn't funny when I'm going to leave that alone. But your question is very important. So I think what we have to do, for me, some folks may not be as interested in doing the story work or this other frames for implementation science or translational science, right? But I think we have to change the way we do our training and how we incentivize that work too. A lot of reasons why folks are not really as invested in science communication beyond peer-reviewed publications, we haven't incentivized it. So we have a perverse incentive structure, which many folks shy away from that work. And so I think we're going to change our incentive structure, change our change promotion process, and also change our training programs. I think if you have more folks who will do more of those 5 minutes of science that I talk about, y'all can look at Boyer. Boyer's 5 minutes of science has been around for years. So I think, I think part of this could be your interest. I have a natural gift for gag, as y'all know this, but it took a lot of practice for me to be good at communicating my science. Hope I did a good job this morning. Y'all have to clap for that. I don't feel bad to say, no, I should go be terrible. I always do better. But the idea is we have to train folks to be able to do that translation part. We have to incentivize them. And we can do that. And I think with some of the initiatives on campus now, I think we have an opportunity to kind of step in there. So you're not saying that our sponsor else can do better. That I feel confident that I can do it because either I've been trained to do it or I've been given the tools to be able to disseminate it as well. So I think that's part of what we will see at Maryland. More training, more opportunities for those type of things to be incentivized and elevated in a way that they haven't been before. And there's another question? Or was that all the questions? Is that? Oh, this is so blank. Okay.
Doesn't look like it, which is great because we have a lot to cover here. But first of all, thank you very much, and I hope you will stay around for the small group discussion afterwards because there's a lot of actual capturing of the data. I think that is worthwhile discussing it. So, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.